all different types of industry, but it's usually leadership training and development. So my audience are not startups and entrepreneurs, but I am one.
Okay.
And so I was just on another podcast where we talked about kind of my journey and what are some of the things that I learned being a CEO founder. So that's
great too. You know, that's another thing too. It's not necessarily always about selling something to the CEO and founders, but giving them insight into what you've experienced and how you've overcome, welcome everyone to today's podcast, Scaling with People. I have Tiana Sanchez here. She is our CEO and founder of TSI LLC, which stands for Tiana Sanchez International, leadership and development company, a #1 best-selling author, executive coach, corporate trainer, keynote speaker, and host of Like a Real Boss podcast. Yes, follow that. Link will be below. Tiana got her career start at 16. That's super young. That's awesome. With the 90% female-led national franchise organization, Hot Dog on a Stick, and became a manager at 17 and promoted to regional manager and welcomed the company as her first consulting client. Tiana's public and private sector corporate training and development client list include Sony Pictures, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and California State University, Long Beach. She's the author of 2 books, Undefeatable and F'd Up, The Upside of Failure. TSI's 4 primary services include executive coaching, talent management, workplace surveys, and keynote speaking in engaging, high-energy keynote presentations at leadership conferences, women conferences, higher education events, and company retreats. As a woman of distinct awardee, she has completed certified programs with American Management Association and Ken Blanchard companies, and her work has been featured on KTLA, Voyage LA, Black Hollywood Live, WITI, which stands for Women in Technology International, and Speakers Magazine, and many other podcasts. Woo, that is a background to today. I love it, Tiana. Wow, I can't wait to get started on this. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's always daunting when you hear your bio being read. It's like, did I really do all that stuff?
I know, right? I feel the same way. And it's so impressive. And you're like, yep, check. I am that person.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your company. You started it in 2011. Is that right?
I did. I started in 2011 on the heels of the last recession. So if we all remember back in 2006, 2007, 8, we had the financial crisis that kind of hit. And a lot of people were affected. Well, I was one of those people. I was working in the financial industry and have been for about 8 years. And, things just kind of exploded internally in the organization. I was one of 3 regional managers that were given the notice, we're letting you go. And essentially everything that I had worked for and, had built at that particular time was just like gone and within 24 hours. And so from that, I said, well, hey, I could start my own business. And so 90 days literally later is when I started the company now known as Tiana Sanchez International, LLC. So that's the short version, but that is essentially what happened.
I love that. And so tell me about your background experience. Starting being an entrepreneur and starting your own company is a very daunting task, as so many of our listeners, including myself, have been through. What was the background in regards to you kind of building up towards this?
So when I was 16 years old, I started working. It was a shoe company, and it was like, thing to do when I was 16. Our family was pretty much like lower class. We were not middle class. We were not upper class. And so you had to work. So I got a job at 16 working at a shoe store. And then I right across the way from me in the mall. This is when people used to work indoors in malls. And right
I remember those days.
Yes, it was fun. There was a Contempo. I'm dating myself, but if anybody's ever heard of Contempo, let me know. But right across the way was a Hot Dog on a Stick. And this was like, if you've ever been to In-N-Out, it's like the corn dog version of In-N-Out. Very simple menu. And so I applied, got a job there and stayed there almost 8 years. And I worked my way up in the career ladder, started off as an employee, moved up to a manager, and then became a regional manager. And it was great because at the time, the company was literally 95% women were in the organization. And so my boss was a woman, my boss's boss, the CEO at the time was a female. So for me, I grew up in an environment where I saw people that looked like me, that had the same gender, as me. And so it really helped me to see that I could do and be anything. It wasn't until I left to go into the real world that I realized, oh, this is an anomaly. Not a lot of organizations operate like this. It's not really known where you have a lot of women in leadership positions. And so when I left the company, I went on to work for food and beverage, retail, furniture, and then landed in the financial industry. But all of those years of experience, I really owe it to Hot Dog on a Stick. That small gourmet fast food restaurant that was family owned back in 1994. I owe a lot of what I've learned today about running my business from that experience.
That's awesome. I love that. It's such a great story. And I hope that 10, 20 years from now, we'll have more of those stories, for our younger generation. So as you were building your company up, what were some of the blockers or challenges that you faced? And eventually you wrote your first book, Undefeatable, Conquering Self-Defeat. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Coming from a non-business ownership background, so there wasn't anyone in my family who had a business that I recognized at the time. My parents were blue collar workers. My mother was stay-at-home mom, and then she eventually started working. My father worked in machinery, and they were blue collar workers. No one had owned a business. And so when the idea kind of came to me, well, you can start your own business. I didn't have a model. I didn't have a template. And so one of the first blockers was a lack of experience, a lack of knowledge, a lack of business acumen and understanding. Like I didn't know what it meant to be a business owner. Thankfully, working at Hot Dog on a Stick, like I said, I knew how to read P&L statements. I knew how to look at documents. I knew how to budget, like finances of a business I had because I had been managing and I did all of that. But it was still nonetheless a blocker. So if I had to go back in time, and maybe some of your listeners are in this place, what would have helped me overcome some of those blockers would have been certainly, number one, getting a mentor like right off the bat, like finding someone who was doing what I wanted to do and, attaching myself to their hip, so to speak. Secondly, I would have started taking seminars and classes early on, like financial business, financial classes, business classes, things like that. I did eventually, but it didn't happen at the very beginning. And, helping to continue to educate myself, but definitely the blockers were lack of experience, lack of knowledge, and didn't know anything about running a business, right? So it would take me a few years into running my business where I started to feel more comfortable.
I think it's really interesting how you mentioned the first thing of getting a mentor. There's been several repeated themes in the last few podcasts where it's been about not being in your own head, having someone to be able to throw ideas at and run ideas past, and have mentors kind of really support you in regards to, am I doing this right? Or should I look at doing it differently? And here we are yet again, you're saying it one more time, mentorship. I think one of the things that can happen so easily in entrepreneurial mindset is that you're just stuck in your head about all the things you want to create. And not all entrepreneurs can then take that and execute on it well. So having the mentorship behind them to help them put the right people and the right processes in place to be able to be successful is such a key thing.
And you can have a live mentor, or you could have someone who mentors you from afar. And here's what I mean by that. When I realized early on, there was no one that I could identify that had a business that I could use as a template. But then I remembered, and it's so funny how things happen once you're living in, the space that you're in. I remember growing up and visiting my grandmother as a child, and my grandmother owned a small childcare business in her home. Now, I didn't see it as a business at the time. I just knew we'd go over grandmother's house and she'd have a bunch of kids there, and we would help them. We would potty train the kids. We would help put them down for naps. We would feed them. We would play with them. But essentially, she was a business owner and she ran a business. And when I thought about that, I said, she was really the first woman of color business owner, female, that I ever knew and met. And it took me years to really kind of connect the dots. But when I think about her work ethic, and I think about how dedicated she was, and people loved her. And, I remember sitting at the dinner table with her, and she would literally fall asleep mid-sentence. Like she'd be awake one minute and then she'd be nodding off the next. And I was like, oh my gosh, my grandmother's so tired and she works so hard. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, like her work ethic was so solid and so strong. So when I think of a mentor, like she's passed away, been gone since I was 12, but I think of her in many cases like mentoring me in that way. Another mentor of mine was when I was working at Hot Dog on a Stick. We were given as new managers a book, and it was called The 1 Minute Manager by Kim Blanchard. Now, if you've ever heard of Kim Blanchard, he's a renowned thought leader, leadership and development. And I was given his book. Every new manager was. And I remember reading that book, and it was like, gold. It was like so important. And so for years, I modeled what I learned in that book, The 1 Minute Manager, and it carried me throughout my career. And then when I started my business, I had an opportunity to meet him in person and have a fireside chat and talk with him. And it was just really cool. But he didn't know he was my mentor. Like, he was my mentor through a book, listening, learning, reading. And so you can have mentorship can look different for you. It could be a live person. It could be, something else. It could, so we can define that. But I do think it's important to have someone that you can glean from, that's had experience, who's been where you want to go.
I appreciate that. That's such a great call out, because you're right. I mean, you can have it in more than just the stereotypical, I meet with so-and-so once a week or once a month or whatever the frequency is. And there's so many great books out there, like the 1 Minute Manager and Patrick Leone. He's also another great author and speaker on many things in regards to management. So plenty of resources out there for sure. And I appreciate you sharing the ones that have helped you in the past. So tell me, how did you bootstrap your company, TSI? Again, it's Tiana Sanchez International, the leadership and development. How did you bootstrap that? How did you start that?
So if you don't have like a whole bunch of money, or don't think about crowdsourcing or crowdfunding or getting a loan, most people who start a business, they use their own money. They use their savings, they borrow, they ask family and friends, which is bootstrapping. And essentially, when I worked at Hot Dog on a Stick, as I mentioned, it was such a cool company that they allowed their employees to buy into an employee stock ownership plan. So because I was there for so long, I had been 100% vested in the company, and I had money. And so when I resigned and I left the company and moved on, I had, some finances, and I was able to use part of that savings to help me start my business. Now, at the time, I wasn't getting a storefront, I could probably say the cost of my business was less than $1,000. Because what am I doing? I'm getting a website. I'm getting at the time I was getting a DBA. I didn't incorporate until years later, but I got a DBA, website, business cards, everything you think you need, right? When you start your business. I don't even think I had a budget for marketing at the time, but it was like less than $1,000. But over the years, I never got a loan. It was always using, my own money to get the business up and running and starting it and pulling from my own, funds. There's nothing wrong with getting a loan if you can get it, or crowdfunding, or getting seed money or capital, depending on what your business model is. But for me at the time, because I was laid off and the turnaround time was like 90 days, it made sense for me to utilize the money that I had to start my business. Would I do that again? I probably would if I were in the same situation. But it's really different for everybody. So, for me, that was the path I chose.
Yeah, actually, that's a similar path I took as well. And still, even to some days, funding it more, right? To just continue to build it and grow it, especially on the marketing front. Because like you, I also did not have a marketing budget initially. Yes. So yeah, that's probably one of the fatal mistakes I made when planning, I'm going to do this, is not having enough marketing budget. So how did you find and use the investments that and what, your funds, or maybe even family members or whoever else might have bought in to scale your business? Like, now you've got the business. How did you use the investments to scale it?
Well, I would say over the years, one of the things we did, I'll use the word grow our business as a service-based business. So you have service and you have product. What I provide is not something necessarily tangible. So let's say, this is a tangible product. I can feel it, I can see it, I can, smell it and touch it. Like if you go into Target, there's usually something, a product that you're buying and purchasing, you're going to the checkout and you're putting it in a bag and you're leaving. The service is not something that you can put in a bag and leave. It's a,
Right.
it's an intangible type of offering, or, service offering. And so how we were able to grow our business is looking at different services that we could provide. So it just naturally started with coaching. So being in a management position for so many years, I said, well, what is it that I did all these years? Well, training and development, hiring, and, hiring people and doing all these different things. And so we began to grow that part of the business of coaching and leadership development and training. And then because there's so many different types of courses, do I want to create courses on my own, or can I license content from other sources and then train on that? And so that's the route that I did. I did create content early on, but then I also said, well, where is it, where can I get it from someone else? And again, license it. So I became a channel partner with Blanchard companies. I also licensed some content from another resource that had dozens and dozens of content, on-demand content that I could massage and finesse and then send it. So that helped me to grow faster because I didn't have to spend time developing content, because it takes the rule of thumb is for every 1 hour you facilitate or train, it takes 8 hours to develop that. Ooh. So if I'm training a 4-hour course, you take 8 times 4, that means there's 32 hours invested in developing that content. And so who wants to spend time doing that? I certainly didn't, because it would take away from me generating revenue. Yeah. So that was one of the things that we did to help grow our business. We also started partnering with other consultants. So I also became someone that would support my friends who were doing business. They would support me. And so we kind of had this nice relationship where I was making them money, they were making me money. And it also, kind of helped keep me afloat. And here's the other thing I will say too, Guinevere, is that we don't talk about often. As an entrepreneur, it is completely okay for you to still have a W-2 job while you're building and growing your business. Many of us who started a job or started becoming an entrepreneur came on the heels of something tragic that happened. Like I lost my job, that was tragic. Something else happened to somebody and it was a bad situation, pandemic, whatever. And then you started your business. Not all of us have the luxury of saying, I wonder what's next in my life. I'm going to, I think I'll go down the path of entrepreneurship. Usually it comes on the heels of something potentially bad or devastating. And so for me, I wanted to, build and develop relationships. And so I started working with people. And again, we continue to grow the business and to see it over the last few years, it's been growing and thriving in a good direction. So we're happy about that.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I love the success stories for sure. So tell me, switching gears a little bit, you've also done certifications, and how did you lever the certifications, and really specifically for women-owned businesses, that ultimately led to more clients for you?
So as you grow the business, you get familiar with language, like you're a consultant, you're a contractor, you're a vendor, you're a supplier. These are all names that sometimes we use synonymously. Well, I started to go to a lot of different events. I wanted to continue to educate myself. I surrounded myself with other business owners and entrepreneurs. And I remember stumbling across some supplier diversity conference of someone who recommended to me. And I'm like, supplier diversity, what's that? And, again, supplier, another word, contractor, different terms that we use. And what I found was that there are organizations out there that have a department, their supplier diversity department. And what they do is they support the entrepreneurs and business owners to help them work with their company. So let's say I am Disney. I'm just going to throw out let's say I'm Disney. Well, I have a supplier diversity department and there's a person over that. And so I'm looking at businesses to see how can I bring these businesses in to work with Disney. And there's a dedicated person to be able to do that. And through that process, they say, okay, well, if you have a certification that says you are a minority-owned business, or you are a women-owned business, or you are a veteran-owned business, if you have that supplier then you can get you'll be considered more attractive. You'll be kind of bumped up to the top tier because organizations are strongly encouraged to hire vendors in these categories. So it makes them look good. They should do it because it's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, it does make them right, but it makes them look good to say, oh yeah, 25% of our vendors are diverse business owners, 15% are women, business enterprises, and da 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 da. So I was impressed, and I said, oh, this looks like something I'm going to get certified, because it could help me get in the door and maybe beat out some competition. Because if you didn't have that certification and I do, and we do the same thing, they might look at me and say, well, we want to work with her because that's actually going to help us. And that's going to, boost us when at the end of the year, we look at our percentages of who we hired as vendors, was it diverse, and it will be a good thing. So that's how I got into using that certification. And it actually has helped me over the years to get clients that I may have been overlooked in the past.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great idea. And, if you're not women-led, maybe you are other diversity type company that you could use to get certified with.
Yes, and you can have multiple. So you can be a minority-owned business. You could also be a woman-owned business. You can also be a woman-owned small business. So I have 2 certifications. I have a woman business enterprise and then a woman-owned small business. And then I'm looking into getting my minority business enterprise certification as well. So you can fall in different. Yes, you can definitely fall into multiple.
I love that. I love that. So we talked a little bit about your book, Undefeatable. Tell me a little bit about your most recent one, I believe, which is your Effed Up, the Upside of Failure. I love this title. I want to know more.
So both books are based on personal experience. So when I left the corporate space in 2011 on the heels of a resignation, or I should say on the heels of being laid off, I would say less than a year later, I stumbled across, I want to say, an author's page, a woman who was a publisher, and she had invited me to be a part of this anthology. It was a book of other authors. And so I said, oh yeah, I'd love that. And so I participated. It was my first experience writing. And I said, I really like this. Let me explore this more. And so I started writing both books. Undefeatable was the first one, about when I left my corporate job and how I started working in a business. And then the follow-up to that was the upside of failure, because as you know, once you get into running a business, you're experiencing the ups and downs, the ebbs and the flows, the peaks and the valleys, and sometimes it can make you feel a certain way when you experience these failures. And so to follow up from Undefeatable, I wrote the book Effed Up, the Upside of Failure. And I did it in collaboration with my then 17-year-old son.
Oh, love that. So
we were sitting in a cafe and I was talking about an idea. And I said, I really think that, I want to write a follow-up book. And what do you think it should be about? He was in high school and he played basketball for his school. And he's like, yeah, I think you should, do it like this. And I said, well, would you like to do it with me? And so in the book, the very last chapter of the book is my son's chapter he wrote as captain of his basketball team. And he talked about what failure meant to him, in terms of in sports. But there's a lot of, life lessons that you can learn in that book. So what turned out to be a book for young adults, when it was published in 2016, I think the title resonated with so many people that it became our #1 requested topic by organizations in 2016 and 2017. So it wasn't written for them necessarily, but I had to pivot and I had to say, okay, well, let me figure out how I can turn this into content that is relatable to the business environment. And as you can imagine, it wasn't hard at all, but it did require me to think about it differently as, you deliver to that audience. So as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you can diversify your portfolio. You can have multiple different streams of income. You can do different things and, and thrive as a business owner, as long as you're clear on who you are and who you serve. So for me, that was really important.
Well, and I love how you said the primary purpose was A, but in reality, it kind of turned into X for you. And really, like, that happens so often, right? You're on this path, especially as an entrepreneur, you're on this path, you think you're going in one direction, and all of a sudden what is coming out of real life need takes you in a completely different direction. And being agile and open to that gives you that capability of having so much more exposure and opportunity for your business and just in general in life.
And it has to make sense to you. I tried to be everything to everybody early on. Like people, oh, can you do this? Sure, I can do that. Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that, and then I'm like, number one, do I want to do that? And number two, is that my lane? And so it took a few years of kind of figuring that out, that no, this is my lane and this is where I'm staying. So even in the early stages, when I was focused on coaching, initially it was life coaching. Like I said, okay, I want to do coaching, but I didn't differentiate between the type of coaching. And so I went through an accelerated course and it was life coaching. And I remember I kind of did that for like a year, if that. And I'm like, life coaching is not where it's at for me. I've come from a business environment, and what I've learned and what I've gleaned, I want to apply it to leaders, to managers specifically, because I was once a manager. So I started to become more niche in who I wanted to serve. And so it was like, I know who I want to serve. This is what they look like. This is, how many years they've been in business. This is what, they're struggling with. And I clearly identify the type of person that I serve and the companies that I help. But it took years to kind of go through different iterations of my business to figure out, now I'm 100% clear. This is who I serve. So that's my lane. So even when different ideas and different opportunities present itself, I always ask myself, number one, is this something that I want to do? And number two, is this something that I'm good at, that's in my lane, that I feel connected to? And those are the questions that I ask myself. Now, it's okay to say, well, hey, I'm interested in this. I don't know anything about it, and I think this would add value to what I'm doing. That's okay too. But for me, it's extremely important to do the things that I'm good at and that I want to do and that are going to add value to my clients.
Yeah. I can totally resonate with that. One of my values for my company is do what you love doing. Like, do what you love to do, right? Like, you could do the whole thing. Human resources, the world is like a plethora of different opportunities and different things that you're working on. But the reality is that like no one is good at all of those parts. There are specific things that people love to do more than others. And that's why I created my company, was so I could do what I love and bring on the people to give them the same opportunity. So I totally resonate with that. Well, to wrap it up, what other advice, any other advice that you have for people who are thinking about starting their own company, or maybe are in the thick of just beginning and, the hurdles and I don't know what I'm doing, where do I need to go next? Any other thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, give yourself permission to make some mistakes, because when you're in the process of thinking about what you're going to do, give yourself some permission to just, take a step back and think through. Oftentimes we're looking at, well, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? So there is a sequence. And I would say for anyone who's starting, follow the sequence. It's tried and true. People will tell you, you want to start with this first. If you have an idea, let's test your idea. Let's test it with different groups and different, target audience. Look at who's doing what you're doing and who's doing it the same way, who's doing it different, who's doing it better. Look at your competition. Think about what your price points might be. So there is a sequence. You don't want to start here out the gate and say, well, I got an idea, boom, I'm going to start selling it on the market when you haven't tested it, you haven't done any of that other stuff. So, but give yourself permission. I would say also, we talked about mentorship, which is really good. Find someone who does what, who's kind of where you're at, the epitome of where you'd like to be, and see kind of what they are doing. How did they get there? How have they modeled, the steps of where you want to go? And there are a ton of books out there. Don't feel overwhelmed about trying to get every book out there about how to run a business. You can find one, and I personally feel having a person there, to tell you can even save a lot of trying to figure out different books. But it is not for everyone. It takes a certain skill set. It takes a certain determination and ambition to get there. And you're going to have those ups and downs. But if you wake up in the morning and you still love what you do, and you wake up a week from today and you still love what you do, and 6 months down the lines, you're still fired up about what you do, then you're on to something special.
I would agree with that. Well, thanks, Tiana. It was so great having you on the call today. I hope that everyone listening has a takeaway from this. so much great stuff to learn from others. I think that's another thing, right? That's the whole point of membership, to learn from others. And you shared so many great tidbits of what your journey has been about. So thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.